nervous because I'm here now.
Welcome everybody to another episode of 410 Sports Talk. I'm Glenn Martin here with my co-host James Haskell. And this episode, we're going to welcome a new guest and friend of the show, J.T. O'Sullivan, who is former NFL quarterback, PhD, coach, and host of QB School. JT, thanks for coming on with us.
Yeah, fellas, what's going on, man? Excited to be here.
Yeah, man, nothing much. We are just as excited, probably about 10 times more excited in all actuality. So thanks for taking the time. And really what we want to do is use your knowledge and the experience that you have and try and get as granular as we can behind the Ravens offense, Lamar Jackson, and then Greg Roman, all of the above. But one of the questions we wanted to talk to you about was, kind of start off this way. Of course, without the benefit of being in the meetings and at the practices, how difficult can it be for a person like yourself or even an average fan to really, place blame or figure out who has at fault for a play not working when film is all you have and you don't know how much and what is being taught?
And I would even add, you probably can't believe what they're saying to the quote unquote media whenever they get an opportunity to speak about it. Like most guys who are probably high level professionals aren't going to throw people under the bus if it is someone's fault per se, individually. I think it's difficult to know for sure. And you really never know. And the other part about it is it's not black and white, right? Like it's not like, hey, Lamar totally screwed that one play up and Greg Roman had nothing to do with it. Well, the coach put him in the position. And so there's always that kind of proportion of, where you laid the blame, so to speak. But I think it helps to have some familiarity with the offense. It probably helps for y'all if you're a diehard fan of an organization or have watched them for a long time and some of the plays that they run all the time, you can kind of have a pretty good idea. And it really, at the end of the day, it isn't that complicated. It's for any organization. There's only 11 people. They can only do so many things, and most people can figure it out eventually. But I think it's compounded because people are so emotionally invested in this sport, rightfully so. And so, that juiced up with the playoffs, juiced up with, people who are coming off MVP seasons can leave the tensions high.
Yeah, I like that you said things aren't too complicated because that's one of my favorite quotes from Joe Flacco. He'd always talk about how he stopped a presser and he's like, "Look, guys, we're not rocket scientists. We're football players. Like it's not too complicated here." So it's a great point you bring up.
Yeah, absolutely. And talk about the passion, man. The fans feel it as well, and I can't imagine how the players and coaches feel about it. But the thing I want to know is, and I want to start with the rushing, and then we'll get to the passing because, they always talk about how the rushing offense for the Ravens is, one of the most complex schemes in the NFL, and really it's been the best rushing team almost in history over the last two seasons. But my question is their scheme really that complex? Is it head and shoulders above the rest? Or are there other teams that, match it or come close to the complexities? And the second part of that question is a lot of fans say just the mere presence of Lamar Jackson will give a team a good rushing game. Do you buy into that as well?
I would probably the simplest way to answer that is just say yes to all of those. Initially, the complexity of what the Ravens do, and you have to think most teams in the league will not use their quarterback as a primary rusher. Mm-hmm. So that in and of itself, let's say adds 33% to the rushing game. That's assuming that you have two backs that you can feature as, the kind of a lead back if they're in the game. So you add another lead back essentially you're going to run the quarterback. Now you can see applications of that in college football. There are certainly certain teams that do that, but to say that you will run the quarterback at any time, anywhere, inside the tackles, outside the tackles, makes them unique. I think compounds that with how they use their tight ends, their different personnels that maybe not every team uses as much of, and then they get the motions going, different formations, and yeah, I do think it is more complex than anybody else in the league. The next thing about Lamar Jackson is, he's probably one of the fastest dudes on the field at all times, so he's obviously going to make certain defenses even more wary about what they do with the run defense. And I think it's like anything, unfortunately, the easy and the hard answer is it's about blending all of those things to make it as explosive as possible. And so I think that they did a nice job catching the league a little bit by surprise the previous year with the jump that Lamar had made and how they were able to package certain things with him throwing the ball down the field in some play action elements and some guys who are probably more open than a lot of NFL league standards. But now that the league has got a chance to see how they construct their run game, how they package those things together, how they can potentially take away some of the tight end type throws. All those things compound to make things a little bit more difficult. So now it's on Lamar and the Jackson and the Ravens to kind of adjust from there and see where they come out the back end.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind if we were the Jacksons either. We could be the Ravens,
Right.
the Jacksons. We are pretty much all Lamar Jackson, pretty dependent on him. But we're going to dive right in here. I think this is Glenn and I take our time and compile these questions, and Glenn put this one together, so I'll credit to him. But this is what the fans really want to know here. The offense hasn't performed well in the last 4 playoff games dating back to 2018. And those games, of course, were against 3 different teams. So our question is really, is there something that the Chargers, Titans, and Bills that they did similarly in common on defense to slow down the Ravens, or was their defensive game plan unique to each one of those teams?
I mean, again, you guys are going to hate me at the end of this, but I'm going to say yes. It was obviously, I don't think you have to be, to Joe Flacco's point, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know what the best way to stop the Ravens is. You have to find a way to neutralize Lamar Jackson. And whatever that formula has been for each of those games, I think has been a little bit different. Off the top of my head, I remember the Chargers having kind of a unique plan for what they came out and gave Lamar Jackson for that time. And so what that has evolved into, what defenses are trying to do, obviously a lot of them have a lot more experience now with this running quarterback. The running quarterback thing is a dynamic that the league has never thought that it would have to handle, because you just have so much invested in these guys, especially if they're on their second contract, that you can't really do that. And so because of it, basically adds an extra gap to every run play. So when you think you're sound defensively and the team is going to run the quarterback, all of a sudden there's an extra gap that you can't account for. So you essentially, have to add this extra player into the run fit that then allows a either void in the zone area, or you lack a man in man coverage on the back end. So there's so many deficiencies that causes. And so the league kind of going back and forth iterations about how best to stop him. And unfortunately, it's caught them at the end of each season. Now, I can't speak to the, holistically where they're at as an organization, personnel wise, on all 3 phases. But I think it's safe to say that I'm not sure that the rest of that team is up to Lamar's standard across the board, just, personnel wise. And so it's a combination of all those things. Yes, quarterbacks get blamed for losses in the playoffs, but I think collectively they probably aren't where they want to be. And then scheme wise, I think it's fair to say that they're, have evolved into this great power running the ball, but they're not necessarily anywhere near balanced. And so moving towards, I don't love the term balance to begin with. I like a little bit more harmony, meaning that you kind of go with what works best for you. But I think that Lamar deserves an opportunity to be a more consistent passer as well. And what that looks like moving forward, I think, is up to the Ravens to decide.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of I think you mentioned JV. I think Kurt Warner said elementary. Heard some basic out there when talking about the passing scheme. But my question is this: how is it that this offense can have so much regular season success using this offense? And in just 2019, Lamar led the league in touchdown passes and touchdowns from the pocket, but yet looks so mediocre when it comes to playoff time. What's the difference there?
I mean, it's fun. I'm one of those guys. Usually I make fun of people who use sports analogies, but sometimes it's the best thing. It's the way my mind gravitates towards. And I always think of it as almost baseball to a certain extent. Like, I might be a great regular season hitter, but all of a sudden when I'm in the playoffs and I'm facing, some quality starting pitching every single night in the World Series, it's a hell of a lot harder. And so that, I think everything ramps up in the defense. I think you see better teams, you see better personnel, you see better plans, you see better organizations, you see better coaching. All that compounds into making life really difficult on a young quarterback. I think the other thing about it is, yet as great as Lamar was last year, and I would argue he's still a dynamic player in his own right, absolutely, right now. I think we get a little spoiled because we see these other young quarterbacks making such massive strides and just being so good, so young. And that's really unicornish, right? Like Patrick Mahomes, generational player. Deshaun Watson, really good right now for where he's at in his career. Kyler Murray, all these young guys that are dynamic players where, if you go back 10 years, this wasn't the case. Like, that didn't exist on any level. Those types of players weren't there. It was Andrew Luck, you know? And so that I think has also kind of shaded the lens that we were talking about Lamar Jackson. The guy, won the Heisman, is the best player on the field every time he steps on the field on an NFL football field.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think that there is an element of just being able to best capture what he does. I don't think he's ever going to be the most consistently perfect technical quarterback from within the pocket, but I don't think anybody wants him to be that.
Mm-mm.
I think it's about bridging what is the best for the organization, for him long term, with the ability. We got to win now, right? It's the NFL too. And so all those things come together to be fascinating to see, the little tweaks they make in the system with his game, what he does all offseason, where he spends his time, all those types of things to take that next step.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I kind of want to follow up on the fact that you were talking about these guys being so young. And you talked about Lamar winning the Heisman. Right now, he's the youngest to start a playoff game, youngest to win an MVP, obviously only second in NFL history to be a unanimous NFL MVP. So one of my points of optimism when I talk to people about Lamar Jackson, because there's a ton of people that think we can never win with Lamar, make it all the way to Super Bowl and things like that based on his style or whatever the case may be, is I always go back to his age, in that there's so many guys that I think come out of college much more of a finished product. Like what you'll see in year 2 and 3 is going to be, the difference between them then and in the prime of their career in the NFL is not going to be as great as what you'll see. My hope is what you'll see Lamar when he really starts hitting his stride and gets to the prime of his career, based on the fact that he's younger. He didn't have the red shirt year and things like that in college. Do you put stock into that as well, that he has a lot of roadway out in front of him to continue to improve based on his age and overall, just not experience in the league, but also, didn't have a ton of years in college and things like that?
I mean, yes, without knowing him personally and without knowing what, what their development kind of cycle looks like within the organization, but just knowing the organization, playing against him for a long time, seeing people develop within that organization, I think it's fair to say that his kind of trajectory upwards will continue, if not accelerate. You see Josh Allen is a good example this year. You don't know when it's going to hit, when it's going to click per se, but when it does, all of a sudden you're like, oh, where'd this come from? Like, well, it's the same dude, right? Like he's just 1 year older. He's got another year of experience. It clicked for him at this point. And so it's a combination of when it clicks, the situation, the personnel, your schedule, all those things. Now, this is also coming from the dude won the MVP last year. Like everybody slow your roll with that type of stuff. It just, to me, it's and it's hard not to do. It's the league is made on overreaction Mondays. And so now you get the overreaction off season. And so I think you're in the right mindset to reflect on how young he is, the strides he's already made. Just imagine, go back whenever he was drafted and be like, yeah, he's going to be the MVP. You'd be like, oh, I kind of like that pick. I think we're going to be all right. This is somewhere we want to roll. Like it's hard, and I get it because everybody wants to win the Super Bowl, but the Chiefs are in a really special spot right now. That's just the way it is. And so whether it's that stays for another 2 years, or they're going to have to deal with some contract issues here at some point too. And so those things have a way to not live forever. And so when the Ravens get an opportunity to ascend to the top of the conference, I'm pretty sure it's going to be because Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, no doubt. Now, and one other big area of concern for the Ravens offense has been the receiving position, or the receiver position. It seems like the only stain on the Baltimore Ravens scouting department is the inability to draft and develop a big time wide receiver. But you've seen tape of all the teams, all 32 teams. So I wonder, as someone who mainly just watches the Ravens, obviously I watch all the big games, but how do the Ravens wide receivers stack up to the other wide receiver cores around the league?
Unfortunately, it's not called wide receiver school, but if it was, I can tell you that I've been in a huddle where there is a number one receiver. Mm-hmm. And that makes a difference. And then I've been in a bunch of, no offense to guys I played with, but a bunch of preseason huddles, in the fourth quarter or the second half. And there's a lot of dudes that aren't going to be on the team, or lots of guys that aren't going to be number one receivers. And there's a difference between separation, space, athleticism, all the way across the board. And I don't think this is just a Ravens problem. I mean, you look at even if you have a number one receiver, at this point, it's kind of like basketball. You need like three dudes on the perimeter to really be balanced and efficiently spread the field. You look at a team like Green Bay, and all of a sudden, if they only have one guy that's really threatening the defense, well, it changes, what the quarterback can do, even at the highest level, a guy who's probably spins it as well as anybody who's ever spun it. And so all those things matter. And yeah, are they probably deficient across the board as far as the mean across the league? Sure. But so are half the other teams. And so I think they've done a nice job of taking advantage of what they feel like is a strong skill set with the tight ends, with running the ball. But yeah, I mean, obviously I think that it sure feels better. I can tell you, playing quarterback, getting in the huddle and looking across and seeing, Calvin Johnson, or, a guy who's going to be in the Hall of Fame, or a guy who's going to the Pro Bowl, those types of things matter. And so I think, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that Lamar Jackson would be pretty good if he had a Pro Bowl Hall of Famer type wide receiver in there to help him out.
Yeah, and I agree with you as well. And it's interesting that you say that, because Eric DeCosta, of course, the Ravens GM, just gave his end of the year preseason, or his end of the year presser. And he talked about, that was one of the questions that he was getting hammered on over and over again. And he finally told the media, he said, look, it's not all about a number one receiver. There's other places that we have to get. And he started to deflect and talk about other, getting stronger at the offensive line, getting stronger at tight end, and Lamar getting better and things like that. But to me, I'm not trying to put your comments in a box here, but it sounds like as a quarterback, you're saying, no, it matters. It is about having a number one receiver. Obviously, all those other things matter, but I think that maybe he's downplaying it a little bit, the importance of having that guy in the huddle and a guy you can throw it up to win 50-50 balls.
I mean, yes and no. Like, not only, but I don't want to undersell it either, that it's not just one guy. It's a core of wide receivers. You need, many teams play with 3 wide receivers all the time.
Right.
And, I think some people, not you two, but some people have
Thanks,
kind
JT.
of a antiquated kind of concept of what football is. The run first, defense wins championships. That's just not reality right now. And it hasn't been for the last few years. And so as teams and personnel departments continue to figure out what that looks like moving forward, because it's not just the reaction element is easy for the fans, for people who, from our seats over here, we're just reacting. They're projecting, where will this guy help us win games? Where will this position? And yeah, do they need to help at offensive line? Yeah. Do they need help at multiple positions? Absolutely. So does every other team. So I think the interesting thing that you touched on earlier was they've hit at so many other spots. Mm-hmm. Why has the wide receiver position not hit on a number of different levels? And so it's not that it's never hit. They've never had, I don't know, I think
Torrey Smith's our best receiver. I mean,
drafted at least.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of guys like that more possession-y than dynamic down the field playmaker type. And so, I think it's a combination of all those things. And I think prioritizing it, has to be one variable across the board, but it can't be just one guy either. A lot of these guys you see hit, you got to hit in the second or third round. You got to get lucky with some of those things. That's the reality of football too. Like, I mean, if everybody thought Lamar Jackson was going to be as good as he is, someone would have taken him before that. Every team passed on that opportunity up until whenever he got drafted.
Now, as a quick follow-up to that, you talked about having to hit later in the rounds and having multiple guys. One of the things that is my concern is the Ravens' ability to develop guys that they get later in the rounds. A guy like a Duvernay, a guy like a James Prochet, and things like that. I guess my question to you would be this: is there any concern outside looking in when you watch tape and you watch these guys progress throughout their careers? A guy like Marquise Brown and things like that. Is there any concern about the ability of that franchise to be able to develop guys that are coming into the NFL into being those, true number one or just, productive receivers in the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the analogy of playing quarterback is kind of similar in my mind, where it's, you see a whole lot of organizations draft somebody in the mid-tier and kind of develop them over a course of a few years, and then they get a chance to play and they're superstars. Not really. I mean, I can think of like Aaron Rodgers, right. And he fell to them, right? Like it just doesn't happen anymore. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot, and this is the part that I think makes people the most uncomfortable, is that so much of it is luck. And so when you realize that, and you're just at peace with that there is an element of luck when it comes to who we get, when we get them, where they are in their developmental track, where we are as a system, how we can utilize where they are with their health. You know, I can think of, gosh, what was it? I was playing in Green Bay, Javon Walker. Yeah, Javon Walker was a beast, one of the best wide receivers in the league. The following year, he blew out his leg, I think say his knee, and he was never the same player. So the timing, the health, you know, all those things come into play on the perimeter. But, you know, I think it's a fair assessment to say, why haven't they developed someone? Why hasn't it happened? And I'm sure that they have their kind of internal conversations as an organization about why that is. But here's the flip side of that. Put yourself in the side of, okay, you're a free agent wide receiver. Where is probably the last place you want to go?
Well, not according to Eric. I mean, he said he's never heard that. So you're not buying that? You think free agents would be hesitant to come here?
I mean, just
you're paid off of targets, but aren't you also paid off a tape? Like if you go and say you only put up 75 catches, but you put up, 11, 12 touchdowns here in Baltimore. Yeah, you're not putting up the gaudy numbers in yardage, but you're putting up good tape and you're putting up touchdowns. Does that not outweigh the numbers?
I mean, have you guys ever played receiver? Do you know any receivers?
I mean, I know they want the ball.
They want the ball every time. You ever never been to recess or something? Like, you want the ball every time.
I mean,
a little, maybe to like a 35-year-old.
Right. That's why we don't get them at the end of their career, right?
It's about all those things, right? Like that's the part again that's hard. Is it's not just about, I just want to win. Yeah, everybody wants to win. But I want to win and get my touches. And really that's the best players at any position. Yeah, I want to win and I want to get sacks and I want to get pressures and I want to get, rushing yards. All those things. It's not either or. And so for me, if I'm a wide receiver and I'm a pretty good flag football wide receiver, I can tell you I wouldn't go play for a team that runs the ball. Like I don't have to, I just don't have to. Like that's not what I'm looking to do. And I'm not saying that everybody's necessarily has that mindset, but just initially, you're probably not going to solve this through free agency.
Yeah.
So, drafting, being intentional with it, but realizing that it's really not a one-person fix no matter what.
Right. Yeah, no doubt. Well, one thing I was watching one of your recent breakdowns and it was titled "No Risk It, No Biscuit." And it got me thinking, because we talk about it on here a lot, that when the opposing defense decides to load the box and give, zero coverage, one-on-one on the outside, I wish more often the Ravens would attack down the field, attack those one-on-one opportunities and put a little trust in the receivers. But how hard is it to teach a young quarterback or just to teach them to trust the fact that, you may make a mistake. That ball might get picked off, but you have to give those, like, how hard is that balance of giving your guys a chance to win those balls, but also protecting the ball at the same time?
Yeah. And it is difficult. I probably was a little bit more of a gunslinger to begin with when it comes to that. I think the game has changed and it really depends on your coaching. If you're getting someone who's beating it into the side of your head that the most important thing is the ball, we are going to eliminate turnovers, then you're not going to throw those balls. If you're getting someone who, talks about being aggressive, talks about, going for it consistently on fourth down, talks about, having to score 5 touchdowns to win every game, I think things change. For me, to your point earlier about the trust about wide receivers and Lamar Jackson, I think one of the things that they could really incorporate, and it really showed itself in that playoff game, was there were opportunities to throw the ball down the field on what I would call non-anticipation throws. So I don't think Lamar Jackson as a whole with his drop back game yet is at the point where he can anticipate every single throw, where I think guys towards their end of their career start really getting into throwing the ball early, getting the ball out on time. It's much more see it, throw it. And so kind of similar to Josh Allen, where everything is kind of an over or a post where he can see it develop and use his arm strength to drive the ball. Well, you can basically, to throw the ball down the field, you just incorporate posts with those. So you can see the post, you can see the defense, you can lay it out there. It's not an anticipation throw where you're throwing it by somebody's ear and it's really a lot of trust involved. Those things come with time, reps, all sorts of off-season work, understanding the nuance and detail of every single play and concept. But I do think that they could be much more intentional with giving him multiple options, use his vision more. To me, he's a little bit, I feel like, and this is again, without being in the room, just watching his eyes, it's a lot of kind of blinders where he's chopping the field either in thirds or in halves. And it diminishes the opportunity to be aggressive down the field. And so allow him to, based on the coverage, maybe take a shot with the right leverage, with the right matchup, maybe on a normal down and distance, not a, gotta have it type of situation. I think you'll see those numbers continue to rise. But again, without being in the room, knowing exactly what they prioritize every single week, it's hard to say, gosh, he's not taking enough chances. Or maybe the coaches are telling him, great decision, don't throw that ball. Nobody knows.
Yeah. Right. And also, I just have a quick follow up to that is, we talked about Joe Flacco for years around here as being kind of check down Joe. They always said he looks to check it down. And then Lamar's kind of the opposite of that. He rarely checks it down. In fact, he uses himself as his own check down. And I wonder, do you think that because there was a couple plays that you pointed out that there was that hot throw available when the pressure was coming, and he didn't recognize that. Do you think that that's because he's being taught to use himself as a check down and the backs are being taught to turn into lead blockers rather than looking to make the catch?
I find that really hard to believe. I've done a handful of videos on Lamar Jackson where the Ravens fanatics will come at me in the comments about, that's just him being him. Mm-hmm. And maybe that's the case. Maybe it is. Maybe the coaches say, hey, that guy's not going to tackle you. You can make a play. For me, I can't imagine that being true. I think that's negligent on the part of the coach. You want to be protected. You want to be sound. You want to get the ball out of your hand consistently and let the playmakers go make plays in space, even if you are a dynamic athlete. I think sometimes he doesn't quite know where he should look, or they're not teaching him exactly where to look. He doesn't have an understanding of where he's going to be potentially vulnerable in certain situations. And he gets out of it because he's just better athlete than the guy trying to tackle him. Mm-hmm. And that's fine every once in a while. But over the course of a season, over the course of maybe a better defense, those things get tighter and squeezed and windows are smaller and the mistakes aren't as magnified. And so being more consistent with the decision-making is something that I think is hard not to think will get better every single year. Mm-hmm. But again, it's about packaging those things. Like none of us know how much, what are they holding back? Are they saying, hey, he can only handle, these 25 pass concepts? Or are they saying, hey, or are they saying, gosh, we got to come up with more creative ways to use, Lamar Jackson's vision, his anticipation, his, accuracy from within the pocket. Those are conversations that really happen with the coaching staff. They're saying, it's not like I can't imagine coaches are saying, God, we got to come up with more plays. I've been around some offenses that have 200 pass plays in a passing game. Mm-hmm. Now, I don't think that's healthy, but I think that gives you a lot of answers, a lot of volume to be able to say what they're taking advantage of, what they're doing, have a plan for everything. Whereas opposed to, maybe they're saying, gosh, we got to call out go because that's what he's really comfortable with. And that's the only thing we feel like, he's going to have an answer versus everything with. Well, for me, I would be furious if that got called 3 times and a half, mm-hmm. ever. But they call it consistently. And so, it's hard to know, if I was a quarterback, I'd go to the sidelines and I'd have a word with the coach about, we need to come up with some better concepts or we need to call something else. But, and also, do you see him, necessarily complaining, given his own input? You watch a lot of nowadays, especially with COVID, you see all these interactions on the sideline. You can see, Patrick Mahomes, Nick Foles, guys going, suggesting plays. This is what I want. This is what we can do. Do you see that? I don't know. I don't watch every single Ravens game. Do you think Greg
Roman being up in the booth is a detriment? Because we've often talked about him being on the sideline may help the communication between him and the offensive player. Do you think the booth inhibits that?
Not necessarily. I mean, I've been around a number of coordinators that prefer to be in the booth for a number of different reasons, but I do. It's just one variable. I think that, I really don't think you have to be a psychologist to realize that something is missing, mm-hmm. right, with this relationship. And so either there's trust issues from the coaches trusting Lamar Jackson to be able to handle more volume and being able to give him more at the line of scrimmage, more responsibility, or the coaches don't have the capacity to create the system that's going to allow him to thrive. Now, it's probably somewhere in the middle, unfortunately. Yeah. But where that lies, that's probably on Harbaugh to make that decision. But again, I've been around, I don't know Harbaugh at all, but I've been around a number of head coaches that really don't know what's going on in the quarterback room. They never played it. They've never been a part of any offense. They have an understanding of, hey, this is the first read, second read, third read, but they don't really know. And so, there's always that element of, where is the final decision being made? Where are we trying to really move this thing collectively? And it's a fascinating project because he's so dynamic and he's so much fun to watch. And I think it's just so many people can tell that something is deficient somewhere. What the hell is it, and how do we solve it? If we knew, we'd probably all be working for the Ravens.
That's right. No, we'll let you go with this one, JT. John Harbaugh got a lot of grief because he said, most certainly Greg Roman will be coming back as the OC in the coming year. Now, anytime we have shows where we talk about Greg Roman, whether we like him, don't like him, whatever our opinion may be, there are a ton of commenters that either want him gone or love him. There's like no middle of the road. So my question to you would be,
I'm probably right in the middle, fellas.
Oh man.
But let me ask you this. So what is your two-part question? What's your opinion overall of his system? Because to me, I think he's far and away above the best at the run game. But what do you think of him and his system? And then on top of that, do you think that in this scheme, he has what it takes to, go win a Super Bowl?
The second part, yes, I do. Yeah. I also think, it's almost like playing quarterback to a certain extent is the play caller, especially if things go wrong. A lot of blame is put on your feet. These things, it's not like Greg Roman, and I've never been in an NFL organization where the offensive coordinator is just like sitting in a room with like beakers overflowing and going full mad scientist to like what he's, cooking up himself. It's a staff. They collectively come up with this. And so that's the first part about it. I think, collectively, what does that offensive staff look like? How do they spend their time? Where are they invested in developing their system and the players is the first thing. And then the second thing is, it's not, I think Greg Roman's stuff is Greg Roman's stuff. I think it's deficient in the drop back game, but it has been for a long time. And that's also not been necessarily a total negative up until this point. It's hard not to go back just 1 year, literally, like, what would it be, like 13 months,
right?
And the balling,
Right.
on every level, balling.
Right.
And I get it, a year is a long time, especially a 2020 year, but I think he deserves an opportunity to take whatever Lamar Jackson has been up until this point and take it to the next level. Now, at the same time, it's a not for long league. That's just the truth. I don't care what the coach says. We trust you. You're our man. You're our whatever. It's always, hanging on a thread. And that's just the reality for all those coaches. That's not, me being a jerk to him or to anybody. That's just the reality. That's why I'm on YouTube and I want nothing to do with that lifestyle. Like, I moved around enough. Like, that's not for me. But at the same time, to think that he doesn't have the capacity or that they don't have the capacity as an organization, I think is pretty silly. I think that, it's a combination of personnel, scheme, development, Lamar Jackson development specifically. And, I think it would be kind of foolish to think that they're all not going to get better. Everything except the personnel, they got to actually go out and do that. But the development of the people, I think, will continue to improve. And if it continues to improve in the trajectory that he's been up until this point, I think the future looks pretty bright for the Ravens offense.
Well,
I like it.
That sounded like a good place to end, JT. I mean, giving us some optimism. We really appreciate it. And I think also, let's see what happens with a full off-season program. Hopefully we have a full off-season. I think that'll absolutely help the Ravens as well. But JT, thanks again for coming on. Why don't you let the fans know where they can find you and what you're working on?
Spend most of my time over at the Quarterback School YouTube channel. I appreciate the support. I honestly have a blast with it. You guys, I appreciate you finding me, reaching out, and it really is fun for me to kind of pick and choose. I'm not locked in on one specific organization, so I basically just kind of pick the best of the best and have fun with it, and it's fun to go back and forth and talk a little ball.
Nice. Well, we really appreciate it, JT. So have a good off season, and we'll talk later.
All right. Appreciate it, fellas.